Hello everyone. So what you're about to see is a video that I filmed a couple weeks ago when news broke that Dax Shepard had made Jonathan Van Ness cry on his podcast. I read a few articles about it. I got upset. And then I realized, because I'm no longer in the place mentally that I was in when I was avidly watching and listening to the Armchair Expert podcast. They also took it off Apple Podcast, and I don't like the Spotify podcast interface, so that's all a lot. But I didn't go in and listen to the podcast myself. I also thought that it might just be like a very painful and triggering situation, so I didn't want to subject myself to that. But I realized upon getting ready to edit the video that the things that were said in the podcast were less along the lines of what I was addressing in the video. Anyways, I'm posting this anyways, even though it's not strictly applicable, because I think that there's still some stuff in there that might be useful and helpful to say and for people to hear. So I'm just gonna let that video play and I'm going to let it speak for itself. But just know that it's not super applicable to the podcast that I was attempting to address.
Dax Shepard, this one's for you. I have strict notes for this because I know that I have a tendency to go off on tangents. This video is about the episode of Armchair Expert that Dax Shepard recorded with Jonathan Van Ness at some point in the past, but that came out, I'm pretty sure, on Monday, September 23rd or 24th. I am disturbed by what Dax said on the episode. I'm acting like I know him. I don't, but I'm just like, I want to make this video as an ally to the trans and gender nonconforming community, and also as a human person who sees the signs of and fear mongering and wants to clarify things for people in a way that is as clear and concise as possible. I have strict notes so that I don't talk too much, but we're just going to go right ahead and get into it. So if you didn't see what happened with Dax Shepard and Jonathan Van Ness, I'm not going to spend too much time summarizing it here. I don't want to take up time explaining something that you can look into yourself. Dax Shepard knows what he said, and as I said, this video is for him. So I just want to be very clear from the outset. There's no one making children have gender reassignment surgery, and there's no one making adults have gender reassignment surgery either. That's not happening. This is really like satanic panic from the 80s and 90s stuff. This idea of people like roving bands of strangers kidnapping children and doing satanic rituals on them. That's not happening. They're not taking your child and transing them. It feels honestly very pedantic to me to get into statistics and historical fact, because as somebody who studied anthropology, I'm sure that you, Mr. Shepard, if you're watching this, as I assume you are, know a lot about history. You know about human diversity and that gender nonconformity and trans identity has existed since humans have existed. And we've seen gender nonconformity and trans identity across different species of animal. It is a natural variant in human existence. So we're just not going to get into that. I just quickly want to run down what's like actually happening when we say these things, and kind of, I guess, not really break down the argument either, because I want to say this in a way that is easy to understand. And I'm not trying to be condescending. I just mean, like, I think we can get really caught up in our emotions, and I just want to keep that out of this and just be as plain as I can. So, the narrative that we need to protect children from making the mistake of changing their gender without really knowing themselves is built on the idea that transgender identity is invalid. And as I said, transgender identity has existed since the beginning of history. We know the statistics on the amount of people who are transgender. It's not really that wide of a swath of the population, but also I think if people would allow themselves to think about their gender for longer than 3 minutes, then a lot more people would be trans. That being said, we're talking about it as if it is a mistake that someone can make and not a way that somebody exists. It operates under this fear that most, if not all, trans people are going through some weird phase that they'll wake up from. And so to allow children to do that, to be trans, to trans themselves, is inherently to their detriment, because at some point they'll realize, oh, wait, this isn't actually who I am. This, in and of itself, this idea that children experiencing gender diversity are inevitably going to realize that they made a mistake, or not even inevitably, but if some children realize that they made a mistake at some point and they don't identify the way that they thought they did, it's irreversible. It's going to change the course of their life forever. That this narrative is inherently pathologizing trans identity and not transgenderism. A lot of people like to say transgenderism. That's not a thing, because being trans isn't an ideology. It is an identity. But it's pathologizing trans identity as something that is spread anywhere and to everyone if it is left unchecked. I think the only reason that transgender identity is so contentious is because our present day Western society, which again, Mr. Shepard, you know a lot about because you studied anthropology, operates on such a strict and prescribed gender identity based binary that is tied to misogyny and heterosexism. If you've never heard of heterosexism, no, I don't mean homophobia, I mean heterosexism, and I'm going to put the definition up here. And so things like gender expression and sexual orientation have to be discovered over time. They're not things that people can know about. We got to the born this way narrative for gay, lesbian, bisexual identity because people used to think that it was a nurture versus nature problem, that people who were mis-socialized would then become inverted, which is what lesbians and gay people were called in the past. And then to counter that, we came up with the, well, I was born this way identity or explanation. Well, that in and of itself has its own problem. We're not going to see, there it is, me getting off track. Let's talk about an example, a real life example that should hopefully help contextualize this. So in the United States of America, particularly, but the general Western world, racism means that me, I from birth will always understand myself as Black. From the moment that I gain social consciousness, I gain an understanding of that identity and all it attends. Hetero and cis sexism, which again, I will put those definitions up, pause if you would like to read, mean that we are expected to understand ourselves as straight cis people from birth. We're expected to understand that when we're born, we are straight and we identify with the gender that we were assigned. And any deviation from that standard is taught to be an aberration that exists on a case by case basis and must be caused by something. There must be a reason that that happens, just as we think that racial identity is caused by genetic inheritance, when really it is a social construct that we as humans have invented as a way of understanding ourselves and also subjugating certain groups of people. So when we say, well, what if the child thinks that they are trans now and then changes their mind? You're saying that from a place and a consciousness of, not even consciously, I don't think, for most people, but this comes from a place of assuming that that being cisgender is the standard and being transgender is inherently deviant. It's a similar thing when somebody comes out as gay and the assumption is, oh, well, you're just going through a phase. You're coming from an assumption that being heterosexual is standard and being gay is a deviation. And because it is a deviation, it can be corrected in some way. Or because it is a deviation, it is something that will pass over time when they realize their true nature as a cisgender heterosexual human being. Now, to get at the point of, well, I haven't really addressed the reasonable question that everyone is asking, which is, well, what if a child does decide that they have a different gender identity and then later regret that when they grow up? I just want to once again be very clear that no one is transing the children. That's not a thing that's happening. No one is giving children gender reassignment surgery. If children are prescribed hormone blockers or hormone therapy, that's because children have always been prescribed hormone blockers and hormone therapy. When we realized that it was safe to give them that, we started giving them that. There are cisgender boy children who randomly start to develop breasts. To stop that, the doctor prescribes them hormone therapy. There are cisgender girl children who randomly start to develop beards. To stop that, the doctor prescribes them hormone therapy. We give them, my sister went on birth control when she was 13 because she had horrible, painful periods that almost killed her. If she hadn't gone on those hormones, she probably would have died. So when we realized that this was safe and it wasn't going to cause permanent change to a child's growing body, we started to do that. That's a thing that's always happened. That's a thing that has always existed or as long as we've known that it's safe in Western medicine. The other thing that I would like to say is they're not allowed to get gender reassignment surgery without permission from their parents. So the worry about, well, what if the kid realizes later on that they're not actually trans? They wouldn't have been able to go through the process of getting prescribed hormones, getting therapy, talking to someone, getting top surgery, if that's something that they did, any other kinds of medical interventions without their parents. I don't know about other states in the country. I don't know about California, where you live, Mr. Shepard, but where I grew up, my mom was in the doctor's office with me from when I was a small child, like when I was born, until I was maybe like 15 or 16 years old. 15 or 16 years old is generally about the youngest age that people start to have surgical interventions to change their gender identity. Now, let's say that somebody does have a surgical intervention that young and they later end up regretting it. People get married and regret it all the time. People meet someone when they are in high school and they say, wow, this is the love of my life. I'm going to love this person for the rest of my life. I know exactly that I want to spend all of my time with them. They're amazing. And they turn 18 and they get married. And then by the time they're 24, they're a completely different person. They have a completely different understanding of who they are. And maybe that relationship doesn't work. Maybe they get divorced. We're not standing outside of the courthouse whenever an 18 or 19-year-old comes in and saying, well, what if you change your mind? You shouldn't get married. That's a bad idea. Now, you might be thinking, well, getting married isn't the same as changing something physically in your body. People get nose jobs often. People under the age of 18, with their parents' permission, get nose jobs all the time. And they come out of the surgeon's office, they wait the 6 to 8 weeks for the swelling to go down, and they're like, wow, my face looks horrible. I looked so much better with my other nose than I look with this nose. It's a regret that they might have. They might want to get their old nose back, but that was a choice that they made with the body that they were born with and that they were given autonomy over. And positing all of this as if it is about protecting people from regret, when we don't protect them from regret in any other scenario that involves their own personal body and their own personal freedom, is rooted in transphobia and cissexism and heterosexism, because that is inherent to the idea of pathologizing transgenderism. We don't pathologize marriage. We don't say, well, because somebody could regret getting married one day, we can't let anyone get married. We don't pathologize any other kind of surgical intervention. Well, because somebody could regret getting a breast augmentation or reduction, because they could regret getting their calves slimmed or their nose smaller or their lips filled. All of that needs to be illegal. Just because someone could regret it one day, that doesn't make sense. There's plenty of people, I know people personally, who have gone on hormones thinking that they were a binary transgender person and then later realized, wait, I'm not binary, I'm non-binary, I don't need to be on hormones. So they stop taking the hormones, and the effects that they had from the hormones go away at a certain point. People, that's how hormones work. We don't yet have a permanent solution, something that will permanently make a human body produce the different hormones than it was originally producing. So there isn't a risk that someone will be trapped essentially in a body that they thought that they wanted to be in but that they actually don't belong in. That's really all I have to say. I hope that this helped anyone out there who was confused about this or who was asking questions about this. I saw a lot of comments under the original post that I saw about Dax's conversation with Jonathan of people saying, well, he's just asking legitimate questions about safety and about children's ability to take care of themselves and make choices for themselves, and we shouldn't be allowing this to happen to children. And I understand people who are coming from that place and who genuinely, sincerely think like there is a danger to America's youth. But the truth is that it just doesn't exist. There's a bigger danger that the earth will heat up way too much and these children will die before they reach the age of 30 because there's no planet for them to live on anymore. So I think we should focus more of our energy on that. And then if they do end up transitioning and regret it, well, then at least they will be old enough and be alive to undo what they've done that they regret. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are not Dax Shepard, don't say anything down below. And if you are Dax Shepard, message me on Instagram because I'd love to talk more about this. That's all I have to say. Goodbye.